Theft and vandalism were problems that Father Albert had to deal with at the church. He decided to put a hidden camera in the church since he was so determined to find the thief. Something startling was shown in the video. As the Santa Andrews Parish fundraising event came to a close, Father Albert sat in the front pew. He planned to develop on the church grounds and enlarge the parish. Following the Mass, he and other reliable members tallied up the contributions, which amounted to several $1,000s, in a safe structure that houses all the precious things of the church. Father Albert placed the money in a bag and brought it to the vestry. The fact that he alone possessed the key gave him the confidence to lock the money inside. Father Albert intended to get in touch with church contractors the next morning to start the projects. He was astonished to discover the manipulated lock in the vestry when he went to get the cash. Standing there in disbelief, he hoped his greatest fears weren't realized. He was shocked to see that the money bag was missing when he pushed open the door. Albert sobbed as he tried to fathom who could have done such a thing. There appeared to be no entry point for a burglar to reach the vestry within the safe confines of the church. There were many unanswered questions caused by the theft. Father Albert was so adamant about preventing a repeat that he doubled down on security and altered the locks on the vestry. Everyone in the parish, he said, should be on guard. As was customary the next Sunday after worship, contributions were taken up. With complete faith in its security, Father Albert removed the money bag to a quiet prayer area within the sanctuary and secured it in a hidden chamber. He jotted down in his head that he would bring it to the bank first thing on Monday. As he got ready to go to the sanctuary the following day, he was disappointed to see that the locks had been picked once again. When he forcefully pried open the door, he let out a piercing cry, asking, "Oh my God, what is happening?" Someone had rummaged through the whole room. There was no trace of the cash when Father Albert searched the room. Once again, the thief had struck, causing him immense suffering and loss. When he entered the church, Father Albert left the sanctuary and pondered his next move. In the church, Albert was met by his helper, Father Francis. Francis assured Albert that the thief would be apprehended shortly after they clarified the matter by promising to be more watchful. 4 months ago, the parish's priest, Francis, had gained Albert's trust. For further protection, Francis advised Albert to keep the funds in his personal room. Because he thought it was a smart idea, Albert did something about it. The congregation set out on their charitable expedition a week later, giving a sizable donation to the parish orphanage. With the assurance that the burglar wouldn't dare break into his room, Albert gathered all of the money and stashed it away. A mom took her ill son to the church for prayers a few hours after midnight, which caused an emergency. Albert got into his robe, made sure his door was secured, and headed to the church since someone needed his care. He prayed for the boy non-stop from morning till dark. He went back to his room and, upon unlocking the door, his jaw dropped in disbelief. It was obvious that somebody had entered. He rushed to the shelf where he had put the money, his heart pounding, only to discover to his complete dismay that it was gone. He was baffled as to how it had occurred. His chamber had an impenetrable lock and a safe door. No one else had a duplicate set of his keys, and there were no indications of forced entry. "What's going on in my parish, God? What should I do now, Lord Jesus? Where should I begin?" he cried out. He relayed the news to the parishioners that evening at Mass, and everyone was devastated. Father Albert surmised that the thievery was committed by an insider, as an outsider could not have located his chamber and unlocked the door. He didn't want to embrace the unpleasant truth. He couldn't imagine any priest would steal from the church because he trusted them all so much. Within the church, amid the heist incident, a contentious rumor began to circulate. Because of the robberies, Albert hadn't given the delicate matter any thought. The entire neighborhood, including the church, assumed Father Francis and Rebecca were having an extramarital affair. Beloved as a nurse and caretaker, Rebecca was a devout sister working in the children's ward for more than 6 years. She had never done anything suspicious in that time, not until Francis moved here a few months ago. Francis and Rebecca had become close ever since Francis arrived. They spent a lot of time together, prayed together, and worked on household tasks together. As they frequently sat together in the church garden, studying the scriptures and laughing joyfully, parishioners started to wonder about their relationship. Albert had observed that they were getting close, but he wasn't worried about that. The thefts were the parish's biggest problem. Father Albert was renowned for his fervor for ecclesiastical matters. As a junior priest, he had first been assigned to St. Andrew's Parish. After a year of service, he was elevated to the rank of senior priest, making his 11-year term complete. Even though finding the people responsible for the recent thefts was his main task, he realized he had to act quickly to stop this from becoming a bigger problem and becoming a scandal. The church council inquired about the reports involving Father Francis and Sister Rebecca. Francis was adamant that their bond was platonic. Since his arrival a few months ago, Rebecca had only assisted him in acclimating to his position at St. Andrew's Parish. He clarified that she did errands for him, helped him with different chores, and guided him through situations that were foreign to him, all out of kindness and innocence. The church had faith in Father Francis since he was a revered godly servant with a stellar record in his previous parish. Following interrogation, he and Rebecca were let go. Father Albert then spoke to the audience, warning them against spreading untrue rumors of scandal. He asked them to desist from defamation, reminding them that it was against their beliefs. A nun noticed Rebecca slinking into Father Francis's chamber a few days later, following the council's report of this occurrence. Both were called back. Father Francis insisted that there was nothing improper going on between him and Rebecca, stressing his adherence to his vows and reverence for the holiness of the priesthood, but Rebecca was unable to offer a convincing defense of her behavior. As a result, the council gave her the command to keep her distance from Father Francis. By the time another stunning incident happened, everyone had finally moved on from the prior controversy. In an effort to bring the parish of St. Andrew's closer together, the Roman cathedral provided vestments, medals, and relics. Little did anyone but the priests, mass servers, and nuns know that the ships landed at night. Because they were to be formally blessed before being utilized, they were kept in the sanctuary. Albert chose to visit the refuge 2 days later to see how the belongings were doing. He discovered the locks had been picked, much to his surprise. The terror was palpable as he peered through the door and saw the chamber devoid of any sign of the communion utensils. The thief had to be one of the parishioners. Albert felt sure now. His broken heart made it hard for him to believe that people he had trusted were the ones who had committed the sacrilegious act of stealing from the church. He was worried that word would go to the Vatican and cause sanctions because the church had declined so much. Without action, the thief might strike again. So Albert knew he had to move swiftly before things got worse. He wished to consult the church council about a proposal he had. However, he dithered, thinking about it. The thief might be a member of the council, so any word that gets to them could also reach him. To the contrary, he decided to handle things independently. He hired a professional from out of town to install a CCTV camera covertly, so no one would suspect a thing. He had faith that the thief would be apprehended this time. The thief was expected to strike again during the next week's large event. According to Albert, gifts were received in the customary manner. Following the presentation, Father Albert brought the offering to the shrine, where he secured it inside. Then, hoping against hope that the robber would really strike again, he went back to his room. His anticipation of the intruder's arrival kept him up all night when he stared at his computer screen. His exhaustion from the day's stress became more apparent as the hours ticked by. He struggled to remain alert, but he couldn't overcome the forces of nature. He finally fell asleep after reclining on the bed. A sound roused Albert from his slumber just after midnight. He groaned when he saw that the bird on his window was quite harmless. He was wide awake because of the camera, even though he wanted to sleep again. He then proceeded to his computer, where he watched the live feed. After keeping an eye out for a while, he noticed a shadow loitering near the sanctuary. Careful observation caused his heart to skip a beat. The masked robber, toting a bag, stealthily made his way to the entrance. The bandit put the sack down, retrieved a few implements, and started picking locks. A few minutes later, he removed his mask and pushed open the door to enter, evidently oblivious to the presence of a camera. He turned on his headlamp. As if for an instant, Albert's heart froze. Dismayed, he put his hand on his head. He had trusted and served the man Francis in the church, and now he was a criminal. The idea that Francis could pull off such a deed shocked him. Everything made sense to Albert as Francis proceeded to put the bundles of cash into his bag. The thieves were really insiders. Someone else crept into the room at the same moment he decided to contact security. When Father Albert realized the rumors were true, he banged his fist against the table. He was appalled that individuals he trusted might turn on him and disregard the order's sacredness. It appeared that they were robbing the church in addition to having an affair. Albert noticed something startling when he got to his feet. Rebecca took a bat from her bag and attempted to hit Francis, but he was too fast and sidestepped the blow. He took her weaponry in an instant and punched out. Rebecca sprang to her feet and hurled herself at him. Francis took a few swings at her before dragging her back. She ducked once again just when he grabbed the bat and started to swing. Rebecca was able to avoid most of Francis's strikes because to her foundational high school martial arts training, but Francis knew he had to pull through in order to get the money. He reached for a little crucifix on the wall as soon as he saw it. A desperate gesture, he swung it at Rebecca, using all his strength, then ran from the scene. As he observed the altercation between the priest and the nun, Father Albert was astounded. With haste, he took out his phone, called security, and hurried to the sanctuary in order to assist Rebecca. By the time he got there, Rebecca was comatose on the ground and Francis had vanished from sight. Father Albert made an ambulance call right away. Security and the ambulance showed up a few minutes later. Rebecca was taken to the hospital and the church was put on lockdown. The security team was then brought by Albert to Francis's room. Francis was hurriedly stuffing his clothing and everything he had taken into a large suitcase, not realizing he had been found out. When he heard knocks on his door, he had intended to slip out covertly through a side door. He quickly pretended to sleep, thinking the intruder would go away, but the knocking continued, becoming louder. He hastily tucked a bag beneath his bed and, to his dismay, answered the door to discover Albert and security officers there. Startled, he stuttered, "What do you want?" "Arrest this thief," Albert roared when his room was checked by the security personnel. Francis made an attempt to escape but was caught. They were shocked to see money bags concealed beneath his bed. Gazing at him in shock, Albert was unable to comprehend Francis's treachery. Soon after, the cops showed there and placed Francis under arrest. As word of his treachery quickly spread, many became disillusioned and began to doubt the holiness of the priesthood. Albert was in complete amazement. Still catching his breath at the revelation, a careful examination turned up the startling discovery that Father Francis was a fraud. Robbers had killed the genuine Father Francis, who was supposed to be moved from Santa Louis Cathedral to Santa Andrews. The person posing as the imposter was actually Bernard, a wanted man for offenses. Bernard has been eluding law enforcement for more than a year. A life of crime and excess, he had joined another group. Certain that his past would soon come up with him, Bernard soon discovered that he was in dire need of funds and resources in order to leave the nation, but he was short on both. Father Francis was ambushed by his gang while he was traveling to Santa Andrew Cathedral during this critical time. Bernard observed that the priest looked a lot like him, so much so that someone who had never met him may be duped. Bernard planned to take advantage of the situation and steal Father Francis's identity. Since Bernard was raised in a Catholic home and knew a little bit about the priesthood, it was not too difficult for him to pass for a priest. Once Father Francis's body was disposed of, Bernard changed out of his own clothing, got into the rear seat of the automobile, and went to Santa Andrew Cathedral. As Father Francis, he was cordially received upon his arrival. Even though Bernard had no idea, someone at the church had recognized the real Father Francis, or at least noted his absence. Rebecca was in the hospital for recovery after serving at Santa Louis Cathedral 6 years ago under the guidance of the genuine Father Francis. Rebecca informed the police and Father Albert of her suspicions during their visit. After looking forward to Father Francis's transfer to Santa Andrews with great anticipation, she was disappointed to see a fake show there instead. When Rebecca first noticed the impostor's changes in appearance, she thought they were the result of natural aging. But when he denied ever having any recollection of their stay in Santa Louis, her suspicions were further aroused. She became increasingly curious about this discrepancy and decided to look into it. Something was clearly wrong with the impostor when she examined him more closely. It was shocking to Rebecca to learn that the impostor lacked knowledge of numerous priesthood concepts and teachings. Given his stated position, she was right to be skeptical. Her questions and observations were relentless. After some time, Rebecca came to the realization that the man impersonating Father Francis was not a legitimate priest, particularly after the initial theft. She had seen him twice late at night prowling the premises. She had suspicions, but no evidence, so she was hesitant to accuse a priest falsely. She stole his keys and crept into his room in an effort to get to the bottom of things. It was unfortunate that a nun discovered her in the act and stopped her. Rebecca might have found out he was a thief if she had been successful. Father Francis had been suspicious of Rebecca's suspicions and her unannounced daytime appearances at this point. He was on a mission to steal from the church one last time before vanishing, but he had no idea that cameras were watching him. When Rebecca spotted him heading into the sanctuary, the turning point came. She hurried up to him, thinking he was a stranger, but as she looked closer she recognized his face. They got into a violent fight, and she ended up in the hospital, after much confusion. Albert and the police were able to piece together the situation once Rebecca's confessions fit with the facts. Albert thanked Rebecca for her bravery and determination and expressed regret for not checking Bernard out more. A funeral was performed in honor of the genuine Father Francis after his body was eventually found by the authorities. Following this, Bernard was taken into custody, brought to trial, and handed a life sentence. The church got all of the stolen funds back. So now the initiatives that had been put on hold can get back on track. Although no other robberies occurred at the church, Albert felt guilty about his first mistake and vowed to be more careful in the future to check the credentials of anyone transferring funds. After watching the first story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Now, let's watch another similar story. Unexpectedly, a homeless man took the microphone at the wedding and spoke his mind. It was surprising to see what happened next. "I hate my life. I can't handle this," Marcus moaned in agony when he paced his cage in isolation. Bandages covered his body as he lay wounded from a brutal altercation started by bullies who preyed on prisoners who refused to comply. Because of his race, Marcus was unfairly held responsible for every fight by certain guards, who never gave him an opportunity to explain. A police officer let Marcus out of his cell for lunch a few minutes after that. Upon exiting, Marcus found a pitiful amount of food, having to settle for crumbs as bigger inmates devoured the most. The officer returned him to isolation following the unsatisfactory dinner. The officer became even furious, pushed Marcus back into the cell, and slammed the door shut when he desperately tried to clear his name by explaining his innocence in the incident. There was no light coming through the black. It was a depressing pit. Tears were flowing down Marcus's cheeks as he leaned against the wall. His tears never dried up, even after years of crying. Just how could he possibly face another day down here? He began to lose control of his mind as the hours passed. He pleaded for someone to hear him scream, but his cries were unheard due to the soundproof walls. The only thing he could do was pray that the police would hear him out and let him go from jail. Marcus merely wished to save his fellow African-American inmate from the brutality that pervaded the jail. Hours of solitary confinement followed, and Marcus still had no idea that the man had started the altercation over gambling debts. His eyes gradually adapted to the whole blackness. He lost the ability to tell day from night. At last, a prison guard unlocked Marcus's cell door. He stumbled out into the hallway, the intense lighting nearly blinding him. There was excruciating agony with no end in sight as each beam pierced like an arrow. "Cease and desist." The warden reassured Marcus that his sentence would soon be completed and returned him to his usual cell. After being held captive, Marcus felt a wave of relief as the words offered a ray of hope. However, an underlying sense of dread persisted. Following his 19 years behind bars, he was bereft of advice on how to begin over. Seeing his kid and paying his respects to his wife and daughter were all he yearned for. There was a time when Marcus was a brilliant young guy full of promise. After leaving Africa for Europe at the age of 23, he found work driving huge trucks by the time he was 24. It was a thrill to meet Sonia, a fellow African. Their friendship bloomed into marriage by the time they were 26 years old. They were already overjoyed when their daughter was born, but 3 years later, their world came crashing down. Marcus was taken aback when he was abruptly sacked and replaced without explanation after being summoned to work one day. There had never been a time when his work had been criticized because he had always done his job well. After repeatedly refusing to go, Marcus was finally instructed to go. The cost of living is rising, and unemployment among blacks is high, according to them, already. Things were difficult, and Marcus questioned how he would handle them. Praying it had been a mistake, he waited in the empty office for a response or a return call. Nobody showed up. Finally, Marcus, who was terrified of telling his family, left, his eyes flowing with grief. As Marcus drove away, his tears continued to fall. He caught sight of a parked automobile up ahead. Out of nowhere, its headlights blazed, and it sped straight for him before turning violently and smashing into his vehicle. Fearful, perspiring, and his heart pounding, Marcus felt his entire existence whirl around him, thanks to his airbag and seatbelt. He was lucky to escape serious injury. After calming down, Marcus went up to the damaged car. The sight of a young woman inside, who was bleeding heavily, sent shivers down his spine as he froze in dread. She leant over and smiled at him before murmuring, "Thank you." As the woman gasped for air, Marcus realized that she had intended to take her own life. He hurriedly removed her from the vehicle and carefully placed her on the floor. "Your demise is impossible, I assure you. She should live for the little things," he told her. "Some part of me wishes this whole thing would just stop." Overwhelmed with gratitude, she moaned before giving in. Before quickly making his way to his car, Marcus went back to the woman's vehicle to look for identification. He reached over and opened a notebook after seeing a camera and notepad on the dashboard. "I hate Dad," was the stunning message shown on the first page. "I would rather never see my ugly dad's face again. I despise him so much." Marcus was having trouble understanding the note. It read like the frantic diaries of a troubled woman. Before hastening to the hospital, he threw the notebook back into the automobile and carefully put the unconscious woman in his own vehicle. She was transferred right away to the emergency ward upon arrival. In the waiting area, Marcus paced tensely, praying she would make it. An hour or so later, he saw a man walking toward them and two police officers. He didn't give them much thought until the dad yelled, "That's the criminal who rammed into my daughter," while pointing at Marcus. Astonished by the ludicrous charge, Marcus faced them. The moment one of the cops pointed a firearm at him and gave the order to lie on the ground, things quickly got out of hand. Marcus made a valiant effort to clarify the circumstances, but it was obvious that no one would pay attention. "I'm innocent," Marcus cried out again and again. But the father of the woman was not having any of it. He accused Marcus of killing his daughter and slapped Marcus across the face in a fit of rage. Marcus resisted, begging the authorities to look through the notebook and camera in the car and inspect the actual scene of the incident. Overpowered by the unfounded accusations, disregarding his entreaties, the father of the woman struck Marcus hard in the jaw once more, sending him sprawling to the ground in a pool of blood. Then a doctor came out of the ward to give the woman's father his sympathies, and Marcus was detained. When Marcus found out that the girl had not survived, he was terrified. Things started to make sense to Marcus at that point. He realized that the hospital doctor must have known the woman and had gotten in touch with her father to let him know about the incident and her unfortunate conclusion. Marcus fervently hoped that after a comprehensive investigation, the police would clear his name. Everything about the day had been too much to handle. He had recently lost his job and was being held in custody for a crime he had not committed. Marcus had no idea, though, that the station's police had already been corrupted. He was forced to make a fake confession and verbally abused. He persisted in telling the truth in spite of this, but the cops would not listen. He was eventually imprisoned pending trial. Marcus was arraigned in court a few weeks later. The forensic results wrongly claimed that Marcus had deliberately crashed his automobile into the woman's vehicle twice, calling it a premeditated act. The police claimed that no notepad was found at the crime site. The judge was forced to give Marcus a 40-year prison term due of the falsified evidence. Marcus remembered the suffering his wife had gone through during his first month in prison and sobbed hard. 3 years into his incarceration, Marcus was devastated to learn that his daughter and wife had died in an accident. Marcus refused to eat for several days. He was so overcome with grief and the injustice that had happened to him that he sat in the same position and cried for hours on end. Marcus was taken to the hospital after he unexpectedly passed out and lost consciousness, where the medical personnel carefully restored his health. In addition, the institution offered him resources to ease his pain. Marcus became convinced that the woman's father was to blame for his family's demise, harboring intense resentment towards him and even considering taking legal action. But as time went on, his rage gave way to hopelessness and melancholy. Marcus had no idea how he would make it out of there after being released. He was no longer allowed to drive, and his singing ability was all that remained, which, at 49, felt insufficient. He was completely without hope. Marcus's prison sentence ultimately ended 2 months later. He felt a wave of emotions as he left, both relief at being freed from his cell and fear for the future. Paying his final respects at his family's graves was his first concern. He would have to learn how to live the rest of his life after that. Marcus cried when he went outside, staring up at the sky, and took a big breath. Overwhelmed by his freedom, he begged for money on the streets to survive. Everything outdoors had changed so profoundly it felt unrecognizable. He traveled, attempting to acclimate, until kind people gave him money. His old area had changed, so he struggled to recognize it in a cab. He asked neighbors about his wife and daughter but got no answers. He tried calling his wife's family, but their phones were off. He sat by the wayside and grieved, feeling forlorn for failing his family and for the overpowering sense of misery. After hours of crying, he got up and walked the streets without sleep. He slept under a bridge that night. The next morning, he begged for food. Some pitied him and gave him money, while others ignored him. It didn't matter as long as he could eat. Marcus lived on the bridge as his temporary home and accepted death alone. Marcus heard old songs when he passed a club one night. He won Sonia over with his singing with those tunes. The recollections made him consider performing again. He went to the club to talk to the proprietor. Due to his disheveled look, the guards assumed he was mad and refused to let him in. Marcus persisted till the owner appeared. Marcus explained his story and demonstrated his talent. With a microphone, he performed old songs beautifully, impressing him. The owner offered him a tiny weekend performance fee. Marcus was thrilled to find that the meager compensation covered his meals, so he kept sleeping under the bridge. Marcus learned of a town-wide wedding 2 weeks later. He went for free food, drinks, and possibly a performance. He dressed his best attire to the occasion and rekindled his passion of music. The wedding venue guards mistaken him for an eccentric man due to his outdated, clean clothes, all he could afford. Marcus sneaked in and sat at the rear of the hall throughout the bridal procession. Marcus's heart raced when he saw a familiar face. He stood up to have a better look before calling out. The young woman walking down the aisle resembled his daughter. His daughter was 3 years old when he was imprisoned, but her piercing nose and gray eyes were obvious. The memories were vague, but the likeness was striking. Marcus wept over family memories. He rose up, compelled to speak. He wanted to perform the song he sang for Sonia on their wedding night, without thinking. His legs carried him to the podium and he took the mic from the priest. The ushers tried to get him out, but the groom was fascinated and insistent about hearing the homeless man's story. Marcus swallowed. The sight of you brings back memories of my happy family. I thought of my daughter when I saw the gorgeous bride. A congregation member screamed then. As he spotted his wife Sonia, Marcus froze at the familiar voice. She stared at her spouse in shock before running toward him. Marcus was shocked and thought he saw a ghost. After seeing his uncertainty, Sonia said, "I'm your wife, not dead. I'm shocked it's you." She trembled when she stroked his grown beard. She cried as she told that their first daughter was studying medicine in Japan and their second daughter, conceived 2 nights before his detention, was marrying a lawyer. Marcus cried when the wedding became a reunion. Sonia embraced her husband, knowing they had much to talk about. She just wanted to stay in his arms for now. We discovered Sonia and their children had never died. She staged their murders since Marcus's accuser's father was aggressively chasing them. He threatened to kill Sonia and her family if she appealed to the Supreme Court, which may lead to a comprehensive inquiry. Sonia and her family relocated across the country to avoid his threats. They agreed to fake their deaths and change identities. Marcus wrote this again in tears. Recalling his anguish when he was told they were dead and the police did nothing, Marcus's legal son-in-law got fascinated by the case after hearing the complete narrative. He believed the police had concealed information and sought the truth because he believed an innocent guy should not be condemned to 40 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He hired private investigators and FBI agents. Though retired, many of the original officers were found and questioned. After months of careful inquiry, the young lawyer's fears were validated. Mr. Josh, the daughter's father, was a sadist who ruled her life. He oppressed everyone, including his daughter, with his wealth. She fled several times, but he chased her with his troops. Once caught, he locked her there for days, saying, "You think you can run away from me like your foolish mother? That won't happen. You must live with me forever." His daughter only saw suffering as she longed for independence. Not money. Traumatized by her father, the girl lived in fear for years. On that tragic night, she committed suicide. She crashed into Marcus's car but recorded the entire thing with a dashboard camera. A video she recorded about her father was in the camera. The doctor recognized her as Josh's kid when Marcus carried her to the hospital. He quickly called Josh to report the situation. Josh bribed the police handsomely to turn the case against Marcus after the woman died in the accident. He corrupted the jurors by altering crime scene evidence. Marcus couldn't defend himself, and only his wife believed him innocent. Even his lawyers sought to prove his innocence. However, the evidence was against him, and the police apprehended all those responsible for the cover-up without delay. They found that their footprints had not been as well hid as they had thought. Josh admitted his acts throughout lengthy FBI interrogations in his home. Investigators discovered a camera and a journal that contained important evidence. It was evident from the playing of the video footage that Josh could no longer influence the case's result. His attempts to buy off officials only made matters worse for him legally and resulted in more accusations. When the matter reached trial, Josh received a life sentence. Additionally, the court ordered that he provide Marcus $800 million. Marcus was ecstatic to have been cleared at last. The universe blessed him with something far larger when he believed he had lost everything. His first daughter, who had heard the news, returned from Japan. Seeing her father made her very happy. Now, Marcus was a millionaire and a joyful father of two. The cosmos rewards obedient and honest people in its own manner. After watching the stories above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comment section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.